Good afternoon. This is the extra credit crowd here to the sweet end. This session we have, this is the third of the trustee sessions, managing board dynamics through financial challenges. And this session really was born from the General Director conference calls that we have been holding over the last year and a half, and talking about the dynamics of board involvement and board behavior through the recession has been a very, very important topic. And I see in the room representatives of companies that have had some financial difficulties, recovered, dealt with the recession in different ways. So this may wind up being a conversation of the group once we get going here. We have three wonderful panelists. Sue Bienkowski, who's from Long Beach Opera, has been the head of that board for 6 or 7 years now? 5 years. Jane Robinson from Florida Grand Opera, involved with the board now for how many decades?
Well, it's 40 years.
The
board is 18.
18 years on the board.
And I've been chairman for the past 2, and I was president for 5.
So a long history of leadership there. And Darren, who's the general director of Fort Worth Opera. And in each instance, you know, I chose the 3 panelists because there's some slightly different perspectives on the subject. Darren, who inherited a company that was in some severe financial distress, and he has repaired the fortunes of that company. Not without stumble this year, you know, as some grants did not materialize, and you had to deal with repair work around that. Sue at Long Beach Opera, a company that has always put on interesting opera with a very limited budget. And financial need and financial pressure is a part of the way of life for Long Beach Opera. And that's another dimension of this. It's not recovery or stumble, it's just dealing with a very limited budget all the time. And Florida Grand Opera, a budget that grew tremendously on moving into the new theater, but given the reversals in the fortunes of Miami with the recession and the housing bubble, the companies had to make decisions about cutting back on the number of productions and performances and shrinking the budget down close to half of what it was in that first year of the new Opera House. So again, a lot of different perspectives about growth, recovery, sustained slight budgets. So we'll talk about how we manage the board dynamic through this. If you've been coming to the governance sessions, we've certainly talked about how do board members ask the right questions and what should those questions be. And we've talked about how do we maintain engagement. Here, a constant undertow is the financial reality of putting on opera, which is that it costs so much more than we can charge at the box office. We must raise money. People refer to there's earned income and unearned income, and I think it's earned income and very earned income because we are just so subject to the whims of discretionary expenditure on tickets and then contributions. So the financial dynamics are things that we always have to move our board through. There are challenges in board management because one wants board members to be positive and excited and upbeat because that will stimulate their generosity, it will stimulate their positive action on behalf of the opera company. And sometimes, in order to maintain a positive outlook on the part of the board, management isn't precise or clear or fully sharing of the financial pressures. You know, how much of the bad news do you share and when, and what are the advantages or disadvantages of full disclosure and transparency. So these are all some of the issues that we want to talk about today in terms of how we deal with the financial reality of opera and board dynamics. So one of the first questions I wanted to ask was about the question of transparency. How much to share and when and with whom? One of the questions too that's arisen, and we'll get to it, is many companies have an executive committee and have a full board. Does everyone know everything equally? Do we wind up having a situation where executive committee members know all the details, but the rest of the board is kind of in blissful ignorance? Transparency and the importance of transparency. Darren, let me start with you.
Okay, and that was a big deal. When I came to Fort Worth, as Marc said, not only was the company in shambles, but the board was completely fractured. People who had supported it for years left, and a great deal of it was transparency issues. So I set out from the beginning to...
And what do you mean by transparency?
There was an executive committee knew things, and they voted on the retirement of the previous director. The full board had no idea. It was announced he was going to retire when they found out he was being moved out. They turned on this board, and so the entire destruction of the company and the board was over a group of people knowing something vital to the company, that the director was being retired, and a larger pool not knowing it, and then voting him a 3-year contract in public in front of the press. People who had been friends for years became not friends. It was, if I'd known how deep the hole was when I got that job, I probably would not have jumped into it so readily. So from the beginning, I knew that that was a huge, huge issue. And so I believe in full disclosure from the beginning. That being said, in Texas we have large boards, so it's hard to call 75 people. So for instance, something Marc just alluded to, our hall decided basically to double our fees next year from $150,000 to $300,000. That same day, a longtime supporter, BNSF Railroad, been supporting the arts in Fort Worth for years on the opera in particular, $100,000 donor. We're going to do health and human services, and we're not going to do that anymore. No opera gift. Really, $500,000 vanished before my eyes at the second. The first thing I did was, after I kicked my computer, was I called my board chair, I called the president. The officers assembled quickly to then call the executive committee meeting, but we disseminated the information immediately. And we started being fleet and changing our season around and saying how we could manage the budget. And the board, because they were fully informed, said, okay, we can manage to raise these funds, and let's see if we can get you the contemporary opera that you want as well. So we sort of turned, by letting them know what the trouble was, they were also integral in the solution, which was, the solution was we had to raise more money. There's no other, or cut salaries or cut people, and they didn't want to do any of that. So raise more money was the answer.
So you did not wait to disclose the information of bad news until you had found a solution. You disclosed the bad news immediately and engaged the board in finding a solution.
Right. I had my ideas, and there were scenarios that we quickly laid out, but they're stakeholders, and so I, as the general director and senior staff, we presented them with scenarios and they said this is how we can help. But yes, immediately the bad news was delivered the minute it happened.
Sue, how do you handle the question of transparency? Does the whole board know as soon as you know? Do you have layers of information? How do you handle transparency?
We have an executive committee that is all of the officers and a couple of at-large members. And when I first joined the opera board, I was surprised at how little information was disseminated.
What was the reasoning you think behind
Well, it had been 24 years of the founder running it, and when I joined, it was run out of his garage with a part-time assistant. So when I was joining the board, I asked questions about financials and things, and I got those things, and dug into them eventually. But it occurred to me that the rest of the board really wasn't seeing this, and that was something that, as a board member, I was going to insist on.
So it wasn't a strategic decision to withhold information from the board. It was just a behavioral.
It was behavioral.
situation.
Yeah, you've been doing this for 24 years, and it works. You gather up everybody at the end of the year, and collect the donations to make the books balance. We're trying to do that a little differently now, and our budget has grown from $400,000 when Andreas took over to just over $1 million this year. So we're doing that. But if a crisis happens, I'm not going to get 17 people, send an email to 17 people. It seems to me that the smaller group needs to just kind of digest the information, maybe come up with a solution, maybe just figure out that there might be several solutions, and then talk about that with the people. But that pre-screening is something that I do in my business as a program manager for development, and you really need to do that before you get the whole group involved, because it's not really a big committee discussion. I think there needs to be, I hate to say pre-packaging, but just some thought given into how bad it really is, so that you're not just emotional about it. You've had some rational thought and some ideas from your constituents.
It's a very interesting question. Let's come back to that, about separating the emotion from the thought and how you do that. So we'll come back Jane, what about the issue of transparency at Florida Grand Opera? It's been a rough few financial years, lots of excitement moving to the new theater and a world premiere opera, and now some retrenchment. How have you handled that in terms of informing the board fully of what the situation is and when?
Well, we learned a long time ago, even before the economic downturn, that we do not want any of our board members to read about it in the paper, which could happen if we withhold information, because stuff will leak out, and we have the media crawling all over us in Miami, and we just decided to have a no secrets policy. In terms of our board, there is structure. There is a finance committee. The finance committee serves as the executive committee for our organization. And we present all the material at the board meeting that the finance committee has discussed, but we also encourage every board meeting to come to these meetings, and they don't. So they can't accuse us of withholding information. And there is a structure. I mean, for example, there are certain things that I believe that have no place in the boardroom. Bob might say to me, look at this letter. I need your help with this. And there's a letter accusing the concertmaster of having taken drugs 28 years ago. And he'll say, well, what do you think about this? And I'll say, I would just forget about it. Or he'll say, this is gnawing on me. Do you think I should share this with the board? And I stress no, and why don't you ask a few more people that you trust? This never came into the boardroom. It was something they just didn't know. This person is doing his job fabulously, and somebody who wanted to do him dirt sent this letter. Now, in a time when you're dealing with economic crisis, and we need the strength of our board to concern themselves with important matters, why does this need to come into the board? That's my opinion.
And with your finance committee acting as an executive committee, don't you run the risk of the finance committee knowing all about the budget and making some decisions about the budget, and that the rest of the board doesn't have timely, complete, or insightful information? How do you keep from having a first-class group of those in the know and a second-class group of people who don't know?
Because we've had so many problems that we have had to create small committees to deal with them. And so the people who are really interested in the finances of our organization may only have the time to sit on the sell the buildings committee, or the, make some strategic decisions. So this might only be 4 meetings for them. And they feel that they're doing something important, but they don't have to sit on the finance committee. And
How often does your full board meet?
6 times a year.
And there are then full reports about the finances?
Absolutely. And if it's necessary, we will send a missive and let people, if we think it's important enough, that they should know in advance of something between board meetings. We feel very comfortable.
Do you worry about not more challenging news, that you don't want to share yet more bad news or challenging news, or you want to give the board a break from the constant beat of the financial drum? Do you find yourself sometimes resisting sharing information in order to spare the board yet another difficult report? Sue, how do you filter, how do you try to manage what is too much challenging news, what is full disclosure?
Well, I think if it's bad news, you have to share it. You can't keep the board in the dark about that. So again, you want to present it in a way that shows that either Andreas and I have thought about it and have a solution for it, or this is what might happen and we're working on it. I don't think you can hide the stuff. That's not going to work.
Darren?
I think that, well, I mean, I agree completely with Sue. We put it out there, but I also try to remind the board of the greater purpose that we're there, that we really are at the service of this great art form, and the work, the positive things that we are doing in the community, and how we are viewed, and often the downturns are things that are beyond your real control. So I think the fact that the leadership, that we come with solutions, that we do have some things for us all to talk about, but we're really upfront with the bad news. There was no way to disclose, to hide the fact that, and which is what the theater wanted to do. When it ended up in the paper, I got yelled at by the theater because I said, well, yeah, our rent's going up, and we'll either raise the money or we'll pass it on to the ticket buyer. They were very, they were very happy that we told them, and they're very engaged, and so they're happy that they are part of the solution as well, that they really feel like they come together and just march together in the direction we want to go according to our mission and passion.
In the recent downturn, the recession hit everybody. So some of the corporate leaders who are on your board may have been laying off thousands of employees. Some people's personal finances were severely hurt by the downturn. So the travails of the opera company may not have felt proportionately crisis-like to those people. How did you keep the board focused on the needs of the opera company when every other element in their economic lives were also under attack? How did you weigh in with the crisis of the opera company compared to the other crises? Jane, how did you handle it?
Well, it was sort of like we're all in this together mentality. And the minute we humanized the problem, and you have to be very careful about the way you iterate crisis, because what happens is someone in a position of leadership will say, God, and he's doing it with full passion, if we don't do better and make this budget, we're going to be out of business. And the board gasps. I mean, this is taking place in a meeting. And so I had to sort of talk to him and say, I know what you're trying to do here, but we don't want to scare them off. You can't say we're going to be out of business, and yet that's what you want to say. So it's a double-edged sword. The committees that I mentioned before, I think, really served a galvanizing purpose, because, and I find that the board members came to more meetings when they realized that there was a crisis. They don't want to lose their company. But by the same token, and this is attitudinal, and it's very difficult, they will only step up to the plate so far financially. So it's the mentality is, well, that guy's going to help, and that guy's going to help. But when you ask them, we can't budge them past that. So who is it going to be that comes up with these added dollars? Their comfort level is cut the budget, cut the budget, cut the budget.
Yeah.
That's their comfort level. We're doing as much as we can. So the challenge for me, for our general director, for our development director, is to try to get them to think differently and be more participatory. And I think the more you engage them, and the closer you get to making strides.
And just a slight commercial advertisement, this segment is brought to you by Opera Barracks Comparative Analysis, because we can do comparative analysis for opera company expenditures across any number of dynamics, per production cost, per performance costs, look at ratios of expenditure to income, so that if you have board members who just want to cut and cut and cut. We can provide evidence that maybe you have cut as far as you can, that you are already underspending. It may reveal that you're overspending. We have to find out why. Is it theater costs, orchestra costs? So when you are confronted with some of those uninformed calls for cuts or whatever else you're experiencing, data can help. So, end of commercial. It depends on the level of the research. So we can work with you on that situation. But so Darren, here you have difficult news for the company in an environment of difficult personal business news for your board members. How do you handle it?
It was, I agree with Jane. It's in the delivery and everything, and we're really fortunate in that when we lost the corporate donations, the foundation donations sort of shrunk. And Texas was about a year behind everybody else. We didn't suffer as greatly. Now is our year. This is the bad year. There was a sense among the stakeholder board members that were the larger donors that while this person's portfolio had really dried up, that person had set into place so much that it was this person's turn or that person's turn. And so there was some sort of really wonderful pride about some of them getting together and say, okay, we can take care of that because these three people have taken care of that before. And again, I think it's because I, as a general director, we as a staff, always sort of seem to keep them a part of the family. And we always, we start our board meetings with singing. We always remind ourselves of why we are here. We're not here for numbers and things. We are here to promote this great art form. So we always try to connect it back to the art and what it's doing for our community. We've just been fortunate. We'll see what's going to happen this year, but what we need to raise by the end of the year is about to come up with. No matter what your budget is, it always seems to be $500,000. I don't know why that is, whether it's $5 million or what, $500,000. But we've already, there are people that are already saying, we know what's going on here, we're going to take care of that. And just sort of, because they feel really, really involved.
How about the emotionalism too? The doomsayers, those difficult questions that come up, does this mean the company will close next month? And how do you handle the emotional side of a factual situation?
Well, before I answer that question, one comment I want to make that, that I've been fortunate to have is a general director who can put on the most magnificent things on a shoot star. So he has he's had a reputation for the last 4 or 5 years of putting on things and always bringing things under budget. Probably, some of the singers are thinking, geez, I wish I had a few more bucks. But so when he talks about, the budget, it's squeezed as hard as it can be, and people are very sympathetic, So we don't have too many people that, and we've been fortunate. I mean, other people have much bigger problems to deal with. But we've been fortunate that we don't get to that emotional point where, you've got to cut this out because this is not going to work. He's already thought that through and is presenting a solution, which the board supports.
So advanced preparation is very important here, that to the degree that strategies are available, to the degree that action has been taken or can be taken, putting out the news of the difficulty, but with as many solutions as are available, or at least ideas as are available. Jane?
I wanted to share with this group something that we did this year, which was a first for our company, and we did it out of need, but it turned out to be extremely successful. We used the same director and set designer for all 4 of our productions. And we struck a deal with them, and they came up with unbelievable creative product with the knowledge that we didn't have very much money to spend. And Bob put together a creative team that really worked to our benefit. And as the 4 productions came along, he then shared it with the board. And so they became part of that process as well. And they enjoyed seeing what, they were scared to death because our name is Florida Grand Opera. And when you have that word in the title, of what you do, they expect it to be grand. And so the board were the first to be informed that it might not be as grand as they've had in the past. And for the most part, it was a success.
But again, the sharing the information, letting them in on the strategy, getting them excited about the strategy, and then the change of the name to Florida Modest Opera. Bruce Thibodeau, in yesterday's session, I thought came up with something very interesting, that every board meeting, good news board meetings or bad news board meetings, conclude with an articulation of 3 talking points that board members go out of the room with. That we've talked about all of this, all of the conversation, you know, this is board material, these are the 3 talking points. You know, that, you know, trimming the budget by 10%, but have some great strategies for cost reduction, or, you know, we have to find another 5% of our budgeting contributions this year, unexpected, but we have some ideas that they articulate for the board, with the board, those talking points, so that if there is discord or emotionalism around the material, it is brought to a fine point that is somewhat more publicly appropriate. I thought that was a wonderful idea that you suggested. Even if it's a good news report, that the messaging is made clear to the board so the right positive message is put forward.
That's brilliant.
I like the singing at the beginning, too.
And I assume you mean by singers.
By real singers, not by
the board. The board
Oh.
doesn't.
our resident artists come and sing.
At the annual conference of Chorus America, they begin every morning with a group sing at the Chorus America conference. The question of energy and ideas, and I have been, over the years, lukewarm about board required rotation and that sort of thing. I think if you have good board members, keep them as long as you possibly can. But it certainly was brought out in the recession that board members who've been around for a long time and been dealing with the financial challenges of a decade or 20 years, when the recession hit, they were exhausted, that there seemed to be no more reserve of ideas and energy to tackle something that was much amplified from regular financial difficulty. And that it was indeed some of the newer, younger board members who hadn't been through it before, who were prepared to roll up their sleeves and tackle the problem. So that the onset of a crisis for me was a hint that maybe board rotation at some required pace is appropriate, so you always have some fresh people who are more ready for the fight than others who may have been around the track a few times. How did you find the old-timers rising and understanding the nature of it versus the newcomers with the fresh ideas and the fresh energy? We'll get to the question of required rotation later, but how did that break out in terms of the readiness of board members to respond to the financial crisis? Sue, any thought about that?
The people that had the capacity to respond did. Okay, so, and others, you know, I inherited a board that had been around for, you know, been around for 25 years. Not all of them for 25 years, but a lot of them were friends of the former general director. So we've gradually been, you know, some of them have retired, we've added some new ones, but we're trying to add a couple of new ones every year just so that we have this new energy. And I found that the people that had been around for a long time were, again, the people that had capacity were not suffering as much as the ones that didn't. And we don't enforce on people that they have to participate and help us at all times. You know, if you have a situation, let's talk about it and see, you know, how we can deal with it. So.
The new board members versus longtime board members, Darren, is.
You know, the longtime board members were really great. There were a couple that just, you know, that sort of said, not again, but they really did roll up their sleeves. We're very fortunate that we have, I think I have on the executive committee 6 that are under 40 years old. 3 of those are under 35 years old and they're full-time trustees. So there is a lot of energy on the executive committee already. They don't have the capacity that some of the older people that can in the 6 digits money. But there were a lot of ideas. It was just a very energetic time, and at no time, even with that last thing that I talked about, at no time did anybody seem to be depressed or defeated. And that was from the youngest board member to the ones who's been there for, and we have no rotation policy. In Texas, you have gigantic boards. We've now gotten ours to a manageable size, which is 25 on the executive committee, 40 trustees, and then we have another 100 that pay $1,000 just so they can have tea, and they're sort of advisory council, whatever. So, but they were very, very energized, and I think right now that the festival's over, in that last push of the fiscal year, I think everybody thinks that next year is going to be better. And so I think there's a little bit of exhaustion for all of us that we've got to, okay, let's just get that last bit of cash in the door, and then we'll be okay.
How much, because you have such an energy and a positive energy, how much do you think about being a cheerleader? How much do you think about influencing the psychology of your board by your own behavior?
Constantly. I try to take time for myself to re-energize that I feel like I'm that all the way. I mean, we do tell the truth, but I try to do it the most positive way. I really do believe, somebody called me out of a session and I said, I really do believe that this changes the world, this art form that we do, and I think it's a noble cause, and so I really do believe it, and I think it's my job to communicate that with them. And I think that were I not a cheerleader, were I not so energetic about it, we could have had a lot more fatigue than we did, but they see the staff and me going, yes, you can do this, come on. And then I go home at night and I have a cocktail and go to bed.
Jane, in here, you've talked about 18 years on the board, and you've seen the challenges several times around. Did you feel in this particular recession that it was an argument for having fresh leadership? Were the old-timers fatigued by yet another financial crisis, or were they the ones with the wisdom to call upon?
I think some of them were fatigued by it. Someone who's been on our board for 10 years and has assumed great leadership of the board looked at me recently and he said, is this going to happen every year? And yet, we need him. But I would love to speak to what you just said. I marvel at the fact that the staff is the one that drives this. No matter how hard I work, or President works, or the board chair, committee chairs work, without the general director and the development director, this board, or our board, would not be as driven. So I think they see them working so hard and not giving up. So they say, well, we have no choice. We've got to do the same thing. And I don't really think it matters where the leadership comes from as long as it keeps going.
What is the difference between energetic, positive thinking and denial?
Well, I want to also speak to, and I'll answer that question, but we do not have a rotation policy. We do have term limits, but if someone has shown up at meetings and paid their dues and come to operas and been advocates, then they usually get reelected. And we have some open spaces on the board. It's not one of these boards that's 85 people. I was in shock when I heard about that. So we do have some board spaces. We've always not wanted to offend or hurt anybody. This year, we were very fortunate in that we have a new board member who's also on the board of the Royal Opera in London. So she's giving us interesting perspective from the way they do it over there. We're sharing ideas. Another board member who is young and vital and enthusiastic and loves the art form, his profile is very corporate, and our expectations of him are to hopefully lead us to some more young board members. And his kind of, there was a big article about him in the paper, And he's a great self-promoter, but he also said, and I'm on the board of Florida Grand Opera, and seeing it in the press was really, really great for us, because you can get a PR piece together and send it in from your PR department, but when it's offered by a new board member who has a community presence, it's that much more valuable.
So what's the difference between the power of thinking and denial?
I think there are two different types of personalities who go into this crazy business of being cheerleaders for a board and for an art form that they believe in. And I don't think they ever see the glass half empty, because if they allow themselves to do that, it's all over. Bob, I keep pointing to him because I didn't know he was going to come today. Our general director has been doing this. He just celebrated his 25th anniversary as our general director and CEO. And I have never in my life worked with anybody who is as positive as he is. And I'm the one that loses it and says, what are we going to do? And he'll say, you just never know where it's coming from. And you have that attribute as well. I have never seen you in a negative position. So that people like you inspire people like me, who I do see the glass full, believe me. I am, but he is even more optimistic than I am.
And I think if you were in denial, you wouldn't deal with it. You know, I mean, there's cheerleading in denial is, you know, it's all going to be great, and then going away. But I think I know Bob. I do, and I took my lessons from Charles McKay when I first became a general director. We talked about fundraising. You just attend to it every day. You attend to what you have to attend to. There are things that are going to get thrown your way and your board's way that you could never have anticipated. You try every way to plan for it, and you just can't. All you can do is tell the truth, you know, with dignity to your board, come to a fabulous solution if there's one to be had, and just attend to it every day. There's no time to take a day off until the goal is reached, until the battle's won. And you know, sadly, like Sisyphus, that rock rolls all the way down the hill again, and we start pushing it up on September 1st. I think people that don't deal with it, that don't say, okay, this is the challenge, we have to deal with it, and chip away at that rock every day, that's when you live in sort of denial. I go every night, I feel very heavily the weight of my staff and my community on my shoulders, and my job to bring this art form to my community and education opportunities and all those things. And so I do worry. Who wouldn't worry about that huge responsibility of 11 people that are relying on you to raise the money so that they can do their jobs and feed their families. But at the same time, we could all make a lot more money doing something else. I think we do this because it's a noble, noble, noble thing. And that not only recharges my batteries, it keeps me going the next day going, I get to tell my community about this wonderful thing again. I don't call it fundraising, it's just getting out there and sharing a vision with your stakeholders, and then taking all those people that are on your board and that are your stakeholders and just loving them. Marc told me when I first took a job in Shreveport, I said, this whole new thing with needing donors, and he said, you know what? You'll fall in love with them. And he was absolutely right. My family includes my opera family, and it's just a noble, noble calling, I think.
There are certainly companies that have, in the past year we've lost a couple of companies. It's been interesting to see the company's strategies about the closures that had totally surprised the community because there wasn't a forthright sharing of the problem, and those who might have stepped up didn't because they didn't know about it. Other stories of companies that have gone quite public about the problem and have found the support, and even those who've gone public about it and haven't found the support. How do you keep from getting people tired about hearing about the cash issues? It's plaguing everybody. The cash issues or the potential deficit issues. How do you keep from being seen to be crying wolf?
We haven't, until we haven't really had, we were really fortunate during the upturn for 5 years, we really didn't have much of a challenge with that. Even the first year of the festival when we had the change, we had to come up with, you know, at the end of the festival, oh my God, we need $300,000, tickets didn't sell like we thought they would. But then 2 years, the next 2 years, we haven't had to really beat that
So you
horn.
haven't. So when you did sell alarm,
This
this
time.
was the first time in a while. So how do you keep people from just, you know, tuning it out because it is the state of reports from month to month?
Find new donors. Actually, that's what helped us in the last couple of years, is that we found some new donors, and we didn't pick Orange County. But just getting some new people in, and then, you know, and then Andreas is the Pied Piper, kind of like Darren, you know, who just is always positive, is doing his best to deliver a high-quality product for as few pennies as possible. And that's a very good message,
Mhm.
that, you know, in spite of, and if it's all chaos around you, then, you know, you're not the only one. You're not goofing this up.
Jane, how do you keep from, you know, encountering message fatigue?
I think some people really just don't want to know. They hear it over and over and over again, and they tune it out completely. I just don't pay very much attention to that because my energy needs to be projected to people who do hear the message. Crying wolf in this business is, the term doesn't really apply because we are providing them with the statistics. Our board members know, it sounds like everybody else is sharing information with their board members. They know the numbers. Now, ticket sales might be better one month than they are the next month. And we couldn't have projected that we would have turned 300 people away the last night of Common. And from what David Gockley says, this is the wave of the future. So, crying wolf. I think that if we have new board members coming in who see hope for whatever the project is, it never ceases to amaze me that a board member will up to come onto the board knowing that you have a huge deficit. It's beyond my comprehension. Obviously, they see light at whatever tunnel, or they want to make sure that the art form continues.
We watch people in Fort Worth because our symphony has now been saved, you know, 10 times, and the ballet needs to be saved. And when the first year of the festival, we sort of did have to really sort of rally the troops. I told the board, I said, look, we've got to have this message that's got to be positive because you can only be saved once. Everybody in town is exhausted with saving the symphony. They're not going to save the ballet. They're just exhausted at save us, save us, save us. Well, what are you doing to save yourselves? So we're very practical about saying, this is what we did, this is where the numbers were, here's how we're managing this, and we need your help. And then 2 people basically wrote a check, but I just don't believe in saying save us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, most of this is not any of our doings. It's just a situation. So be strategic, have a plan, articulate your plan to the community, but don't say, please save us because we're this helpless art organization. We always turn it back and go, this is the services we're providing for the community. This is what we need to balance our books. We'd like your assistance in that, whether it's public money or private money, whatever it is. We try to keep it positive, business-like, strategic, and we never say, please save us just because we're good for you.
Sue, I saw you nodding your head for your viewpoints.
Well, I really think that you have to present a case for why you're a winner or going to be a winner, because people don't want to support losers. And if there's a perception that you have gotten into a situation because you haven't managed yourself properly, it's going to be very tough to sell.
Isn't that precisely the pressure that puts a burden on you to almost not be transparent? That no one supports a loser, so we can't really share the information. How do you equate?
We have to be a loser with a plan. No, but that's it. You know, if you are losing, you're not. You have a great art to present, so you're not a complete loser. But if you are behind, I just think that presenting that kind of business-like, you know, I know what I'm doing here, I know I'm suffering because of this.
And we've all
here's-
suffered in this, make
We've
it
all
easier
suffered,
this year.
yeah, you know, and this is how we're gonna move forward and move forward with this.
Jane?
I'd like to add this. In Miami, we lost our Philharmonic quite a number of years ago. And it bothered me tremendously that many of their supporters waltzed their way across the street to the other orchestra that was in town. They brought their money, they bought subscriptions, and I think loyalty building within your own organization is essential, because I have seen tremendous constancy on the part of our
How
board.
do you build loyalty?
You build loyalty because you don't have transparency. You are truthful. You are honest. You've created a good product. I loved when Jimmy Conlon said today, you don't betray the music, and you don't betray the art form. And you stay honest within the creative process, the human process, and the business process.
How do you deal with the numbing effect?
You know, I'm very active in the building of our board, and so there are times that we've got to have a downtown CEO that's going to bring in a lot of money, but we really choose our chairperson and our president and our president-elect with a lot of with connections, but with a lot of cheerleading ability. I don't want to have a president or a chair that's not passionate about what we do. So just as I am, rah, 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 our leadership is also that way too. I'm not sure, we actually were in a situation like that, and because the board realized that situation was becoming untenable quickly, and they could see it in me, that in a finance committee meeting or something, I would just deflate, and they had never seen that. And they went together and asked him to resign. So they just said, the face of our board is changing, we see the challenges here. Did we lose that donor? Did we lose it? Yes, we did, but we have a much happier, much more focused board, and the apathy went away. I was very proud of the board that they saw what I already knew was a challenge, and I was just sort of willing to muddle through, but they were savvy enough to look and see what it was doing to me and to the staff, and they took care of it themselves.
Jane, how would you answer that? How do you deal with the apathy that may arise?
I believe that you deal with apathy through engagement. And as a board chair, if I see somebody who seems to be apathetic, I try to find an area that they could be engaged in, or people love to show that they're involved, even though sometimes you have to create a project for them because they're not innovators. And I could be better at it, actually. I think a lot that I've been trying to think of new ways to engage, and I have taken a great deal of encouragement from this conference, because the shared ideas that we've had, we're going back now, and we have an obligation to really try to come back, I think.
And again, even what Jane just said, keep in mind the size of boards, and again, you want to be able to notice when someone's become apathetic, or a group of people have become apathetic. You want to be able to communicate and coach them out of the apathy, to think about the activities that will generate their enthusiasm, and you can't do that for 100 people. So, ideal size of a board, there is no ideal size of a board, but how many people can you manage carefully enough to ensure that they are largely engaged and on message?
The other thing, too, is when someone says they're going to resign from the board, and you have your personal conversation with them, and you think you have a handle on it, and you say, oh, come on, don't you want to give it another year and think about it and become engaged? And they say no. The bottom line is that the message that I'm receiving is they're not having fun. And so there's a dividing line between the fun quotient and the work quotient. How much of your time are you willing to put in to a company in lean, mean years without taking out as much from it as you put in? And that's a very, very fine dividing line. I let this person go. I discussed it with Bob, and I'd rather put my energy into finding a new board member who maybe will be willing to give more than she takes out.
Great, thank you so much.